Well, g'day everyone. Welcome to another one of my round the world journeys. Today, as you might have guessed, I am in Australia. Now, Australia is a country that I know quite well. I've been fascinated with the country ever since I was a kid when I had a book all about the strange animals that live down there. And back in the 1990s, I was lucky enough to actually live and work in Melbourne for a couple of years. So I've seen a fair amount of the country and I want to share a little bit about it with you. I'm wearing green and gold for Australia because those are their national colours. And of course, I've got some helpers. So I'd like to introduce you first of all to Skippy and Joey, and also to Bill. And they are here to tell you that Australians are lovely, kind, friendly people, and you should go and visit their country. Now, they do make the point that there are one or two Australians that are a little bit dangerous. Australia is home to most of the most poisonous animals in the world. However, there's a very easy way to tell whether an Australian is dangerous. If they have fewer than 2 legs or more than 4 legs, then you should be very, very wary of them. But otherwise, they are lovely, friendly people. Well, unless you're playing them at sport, in which case they will kick your head in a lovely and friendly way. Now, what else do we know about Australia? Well, let's start with Melbourne, which is where I lived when I was out there. Melbourne is famous for lots of things. In particular, it's home to Australia's 2 most famous women. One of them is the Princess of Pop, Kylie Minogue, and the other, of course, is Dame Edna Everage. So, Melbourne, famous people. But Melbourne is most famous in Australia for sport. Melbourne is the sporting capital of Australia. It has the Melbourne Cricket Ground, where all of Australia's biggest cricket matches are played. It has the Australian Open tennis tournament. It has the Australian Grand Prix. That even has its own sport. You've probably heard of Australian rules football, but that's almost unknown outside of Victoria, which is the state where Melbourne is. I mean, they have teams in 1 or 2 of the other cities now, but the vast majority of teams in the AFL come from Victoria. The game was invented there. We regard it as our game. And what's more, my beloved Richmond Tigers are currently the reigning AFL champions. Go Tigers! Yes! So, what more can we ask for? Well, Melbourne is also the science fiction capital of Australia. It has Australia's oldest science fiction club, the Melbourne Science Fiction Club, which I was a member of while I was out there. And every time that the World Science Fiction Convention has visited Australia, it has been in Melbourne. So, good. Now, of course, there's a lot more to Australia than that. Australia is a really, really big country. You know, it's around about the size of the continental USA, but it has a population that is less than half that of England. So there's an enormous amount of wild countryside out there, and it's incredibly beautiful. It's a really lovely place just to drive around and see the countryside. But there are also a number of great tourist areas. Sydney, obviously, is the big attraction that most people will go and visit, and I've certainly got some happy memories of going there. Up in Queensland, you have Cairns, which is the jumping off place for the Great Barrier Reef, which is an absolutely gorgeous place, and sadly, large parts of it have already been lost to climate change. I am so happy that I got to go and see it while it was still in its prime. You have then Adelaide, known as the City of Churches. I've visited that on a few occasions, and it's very, very pretty. Also has a chocolate factory, which is good. And then out in the far west, you've got Perth, which is screamingly hot, or at least it was screamingly hot when I visited it, which was like 20 years ago. It's even hotter than that now, but there are some lovely, lovely places out in Western Australia. Then there's the whole Red Centre and up to Darwin in the north. It's an enormous country. I haven't by any means seen all of it, but hopefully with some of the photo tours and a little chat with Kevin, then I'll be able to give you some idea of what the place is like. In terms of food, Australia hasn't really produced any fabulous plants that have improved our cuisine a lot. There are some really strange things that they eat out there, including grubs and stuff like that. And that hasn't really caught on. Macadamia nuts are possibly one of the biggest hits in terms of Australian cuisine, and they are delicious. I'm very fond of them. But one of the things I loved about Melbourne was how international its cuisine is. People have come to live in Australia from all over. It was Melbourne that taught me to love Turkish bread and halloumi cheese. It was Melbourne that taught me to love dim sum or yum cha, dependent on which particular part of China you come from as to what you call it. It was Melbourne that really taught me to love sushi as well, because you get some amazing fresh fish in Australia. Actually, I have to admit that the best sushi I've ever had in Australia was from Hobart in Tasmania, which of course is another. I might have some photographs of Hobart somewhere, but the sushi in Hobart is amazing because it sits right on the Southern Ocean. There's nothing between Hobart and Antarctica, and there's loads of amazing fish that they can land there. Australia does also, of course, have an amazing wine industry, which is partly thanks to the fact that we shipped a whole load of German and Italian prisoners of war out there during the Second World War. And when the end of the war came, they all refused to go home because, hey, they liked it in Australia. They do actually produce some quite good beer as well, but they drink it all themselves. It's only the rubbish stuff that they export to England. But the best thing to come out of Australia in terms of food is these things. These are the best chocolate biscuits in the world, bar none. They're called Tim Tams, and let's just open up a packet so that you can see them. These, by the way, are the special double-coated ones, so there's an extra layer of chocolate on them. So this is a Tim Tam. They're absolutely yummy. The Australians do some very strange things with them, like drinking coffee through them like they're a straw, but you don't have to do that. You can just enjoy the fact that they are really, really wonderful chocolate biscuits. They're quite hard to get hold of in the UK. There are some specialty shops in London and places like that that stock them, but I managed to buy some on Amazon, so I'm sure that you can try them out as well, and I'm sure that you will come to love them as much as I do. Now, I'm going to go off to the kitchen and prepare a traditional Australian dish. Well, hello again, everyone. I'm back from the kitchen and I have my Australian meal ready. I need to move the camera a little bit to show you this because I don't want to spill anything off the plate, but this is surf and turf. So that's traditional Australian food, both meat and seafood. In my particular case, it's British steak because kangaroo steak is a little hard to come by in the UK, especially in the current circumstances. And the prawns I've just stir-fried in olive oil with a few spices, chili, ginger, black pepper, and so on. And I'm going to settle in and enjoy that. And then I will have for dessert some of the lovely Tim Tam biscuits. By the way, in terms of wine, my favourite Australian wine is Shiraz. I'm particularly partial to this stuff, but I don't really want to drink an entire bottle of it, so I've picked up a little bit of the Wolf Blass Cabernet Sauvignon. Australian red wines, lovely. Australian Chardonnay, lovely. Great wines, well done Australia. I'm going to go and tuck in.